Hey, Guru, everyone.
Jai
Hi, Guru.
Guru. Welcome to this minute 63 of Awake, minute by minute podcast. We have the usual suspects with us, Mike and Priyank. And Priyank, would I say suffering in 40-degree heat? I would hazard a guess. You're in your summer attire today. It's very, very warm in London, and you never get time to acclimatize. Does it affect your meditation practices, or
Yes, it does. Affects every aspect of your life. But yeah, we slept outside yesterday. It's pretty nice. But you get benefits like that.
Well, I imagine in the summertime with the sun coming up early, it does maybe help with some meditative practices of early morning meditation. But yeah, the heat that comes with it, challenging. I'm in a mud hut today, so I'm nice and cool in Brazil. So juxtapositions. Mike, how are you keeping?
Everything's fine here. I mean, California is in a 30-year drought or something, but we're used to that already, so it's fine.
Yes, indeed. Well, good to chat with you guys today. We have a packed minute, very interesting topics to discuss. As always, really, this documentary does offer up a lot of good content in a short amount of time. We're covering half the previous minute, technically, in the documentary for any keen followers, from 1 minute, from 30 seconds into the last minute, and we're going into 40 seconds into the following minute. So if anybody's really following keenly, just so you know, that is what we're doing this minute, and we will be covering the topic of Sri Yukteswar and his Mahasamadhi. So let's start, shall we? And really, the previous minute, to add context, Yogananda has returned triumphantly to India, where he is with God-mad and God-hungry crowds, and we talked about that in depth in the last minute, where he was fighting the feeling that he wanted to stay in India. He didn't want to go back to the United States, and he, yeah, we see him with many spiritual leaders and so on and so forth. And really, in the last shots of the previous minute, we see a depiction of a telegram that was sent to Yogananda, and it was telling him to come back to the Puri ashram at once. And this ominously set the scene for minute 63, which we'll go into now. And something I can begin with was left out of the film that was really in the story that was depicted more in the Autobiography of Yogi, as I'm sure we're all quite familiar with, but they left it out of the documentary of the film. And we can kind of talk about why. There's a couple of bits that they leave out here around the story of Sri Yukteswar's passing and Mahasamadhi, but we can go into the details. Priyank, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think the most important thing that they leave out is his resurrection, which I find very interesting.
Yes.
Like with my nephew, sorry, my younger brother-in-law has seen the film, and he thinks that's all he needs to do. And this is a prime example where watching the film leaves you with like not even 1% of what you can get out of reading the Autobiography of Yogi.
Yeah, it's very true. And there's 2 points actually where Sri Yukteswar appears to Guruji that they leave out. And I'll touch on the other one in a moment, but just to go through this in order. So Yogananda is with Sri Yukteswar. And there's stories where Sri Yukteswar is being spoken to by his disciples to visit Kiddapur. And he refuses, and he says, "I shall go to Kiddapur no more." And there's an interesting comment here in the Autobiography of Yogi. It says, "For a moment, Master Sri Yukteswar trembled like a frightened child." Super, super interesting. It goes on to detail why this is. And it says, "Attachment to body residence springing up from its own nature, i.e. arising from immemorial roots, past experiences of death." Patanjali wrote, "Is present in slight degree, even in great saints." So really, even in somebody like Sri Yukteswar, you will still have that bondage from spirit to the body. Parek, do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, it's pretty epic to think that an avatar would tremble at anything in this life, let alone at death, which for a saint such as Sri Yukteswar would seem trivial, wouldn't it? Birth and death.
For sure. Mike?
Yeah, it's kind of humanizes him, and at the same time, for the people who see him as a super as a supernatural being, they kind of are reminded why this happens. So that's why he explains it, I think, in the autobiography. One thing I wanted to mention about what you guys said earlier about the resurrection is that the movie somehow it has a different vibe than the autobiography. I feel like they're trying to hold back a lot on all the miracles and all the supernatural things. They try to make it more like a documentary. And the one supernatural thing they talk about is the going within and the inner states that he has, but not really beyond that. Maybe that's on purpose, probably.
Yeah, that crossed my mind as well. I think they were trying to hone in, had a limited scope, but maybe that's something they could tackle in a second run. Take two awake. There was a really interesting line here that I believe Sri Yukteswar said, just as a long-caged bird hesitates to leave its accustomed home when the door is opened. And that's in reference to what we just said. And Guruji must have then responded to say, I entreated him with a sob, don't say that, never utter those words to me. So Yogananda is really pushing against, he's resisting against what seems to be the inevitable transition and passing of Sri Yukteswar, that Sri Yukteswar seemed to know that was coming. And there's another story here that goes on. Guruji is really oblivious to these hints. So he is making plans, Guruji Yogananda, to go to Allahabad. And Sri Yukteswar says to him, do you really want to go? And Yogananda remarks to say, well, once you saw Babaji, I think it's my turn to see him, essentially. And Sri Yukteswar said, I don't think you'll meet him there. And then he went silent, not to interrupt Yogananda's plans. And Yogananda does go ahead with those plans, and he leaves to go there. And there is an interesting story that one of Sri Yukteswar's disciples tells Yogananda when he does return that Sri Yukteswar really was quite, I wouldn't say distressed, but he remarked how Yogananda had left. Yogananda was gone. Yogananda was gone. And he clearly felt like this was the last time he would see Yogananda. So that was another story that they left out. So these premonitions, Sri Yukteswar seemed to know that time is coming. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, it's interesting that he kind of like brushed off that feeling. When Yogananda was going, he obviously didn't want him to go because he wanted in some way to him to be near him when he passes, but he brushed it off. And then as soon as played this game or an act, and then as soon as he went, then he let his true feelings out. He's Yogananda is gone. So just as later on, Yogananda said, "Oh, the Lion of Bengal is gone." Similarly, Yukteswar had that similar impact when he knew that this was the last time he was going to see him, whereas Guruji didn't know, which is an interesting parallel.
Yeah, Mike.
Yeah, I've always thought if I Yogananda and I want to go to Allahabad, and Sri Yukteswar tells him, I don't think you'll see Babaji there. Then I would go okay, why? Maybe I shouldn't go then. But I feel like that kind of describes a bit the nature of their relationship a bit, not Guruji's trying to follow his intuition all the time, right? And not really the words, the verbal words spoken between them. And the intuition, that's what he was trying to explain, I think. It was hiding the true intention of Sri Yukteswar, that Sri Yukteswar actually didn't want Yogananda to go because he was going to pass, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I suppose he probably felt that there was this divine intervention in some ways coming in to this, to separate them. And Yogananda talks about that himself. He says, apparently I was remaining oblivious to implications in Sri Yukteswar's attitude because the Lord wished to spare me the experience of being forced helplessly to witness my guru's passing. And we talked about that before. You know, he's had multiple occasions, right? So who are the occasions where he was spared witnessing of the passing of his loved ones? His mother,
Ananta, and probably Luther Burbank as well.
Yeah, Luther Burbank as well, yeah. With his brother Ananta, he felt the moment of his passing in the store when he dropped a souvenir that he bought.
Yeah. Crazy. Yeah. So Yogananda does receive this news, as we saw in the previous minute, technically, come to Puri Ashram at once, the telegram said, and it was sent on March the 8th. And really, Yogananda described the receiving of the message as, well, he was in anguish at the implications. So immediately he realized, what's happened. And he said he dropped to his knees, all of this in the autobiography of a yogi. He dropped to his knees and implored God that my guru's life be spared. And this is interesting as well. Do you recall the story of the little deer in Ranchi, when Guruji was praying to save the life of this animal, and then the animal came in spirit form to say, "Hey, you got to let me go. You know, it's time for me to move on." And he realized he was holding it back on its journey. So maybe this was another reason why they almost had to be separated at that point, because the incessant prayers, I think Yogananda describes, that it would have interrupted this passing and relieving of the body in that moment, because the prayers probably would have been so strong, magnetic, powerful force that it may have interrupted it somehow. And really, when he was praying, it was answered. But this is incredible, really. He says it was answered. The divine voice spoke within, "Do not go to Puri tonight. Thy power cannot be granted." And he inwardly agreed to simply not travel that night to go to Puri and put it off for the next day. But I'll pause before I go on to this next bit, because it's another insane part. Mike, you have a comment to make?
Yeah, first I could think of one more person that he wasn't there for when they passed on. It was Sister Gyanamata, where they all went on a short trip on that day, right? This also reminded me a bit of him getting the telegram. Reminded me a bit of his mother passing, when he had the vision, and then in the morning they got the telegram, come quickly. And yeah, Yogananda, I feel like because they didn't really communicate that Sri Yukteswar was going to pass, I guess maybe Yogananda would have understood it more then, but now that it hits him like that he's leaving, he's like, of course, trying to move heaven and earth for it not to happen. Amazing.
But then he has the wherewithal to listen to his intuition, to listen to the divine voice within him. I just thought that was incredible, because he's clearly feeling, he says, anguish, there's going to be emotions there. He would have been praying incessantly to try to, allow Sri Yukteswar more time on earth, because he wanted to spend time with him simply. But yet he listened to this prayer, this answer to his prayer. So it's real powerful for me, that part of the story. Prick.
Yeah, maybe I should I don't know if I should, but I will relate a personal story. So I think you'll know that my mum passed away a few months ago, and a few weeks before her actual passing, she was going through a tough time, and she wasn't really responding. And I went over, and then I held her hand, and I stroked her hair. She was still breathing, and her heart rate was there, but she wasn't responding. Her eyes were open, but it wasn't responding. So I was really trying to, really called her back. And after 10 minutes, she came back, and then a couple of weeks after that, her health got really bad, and she left. And there was various reasons why I couldn't go during, went on the last moment when she passed, even though I could have gone. There was nothing stopping me, but various things happened. But I was thinking that was probably actually her time to go, that previous time, because then she wouldn't have suffered those last 2 weeks. But that bond is so strong that it stops the natural thing that's supposed to happen, which is the easy passage, I suppose, or the resistance-free passage.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I think I've mentioned in the last couple of minutes episodes about the book, the Sadhguru's death book, and he mentions in there just what you say is having family members and friends around you at the time of passing can interrupt your the ease of which you do pass. Because of the emotions, the memories, tying you to those people and tying you to the material plane. So yeah, divine intervention happens for a reason. Priyank?
Yeah, let Mike come back first. Actually, I'll come back for the second point.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that story, Priyank, because I feel like when you get into the teachings of metaphysics and of the Bhagavad Gita and of reincarnation, you see this whole reincarnation cycle, and you start thinking, yeah, people come, people go, and you lose a bit the kind of connection part between people. And that's why I love that Guruji and Sri Yukteswar, he had the strong bond here, and he had a strong bond with so many people, and he had a hard time letting go each time, right? And that's why it's so nice to hear from Priyank how he had this connection with his mother. And because even though we all reincarnate and we see each other probably over and over again, those connections are still very meaningful and they are very important. And I feel like they're also a big part of the lives that we live.
Sure. Priyank, do you want to?
Yeah, interesting. After like 1 or 2 months, after 40 days, which is Samyakala, which is a period of time in Hinduism where like things change. So 40 days after her passing, we did various rituals, and then I took down pictures of my mum that I had on my walls, and my wife was like, "What are you doing?" and I said that's her memory doesn't need to be there in your face, in that what happened in her last moments in terms of me perhaps being a hindrance for her easily moving on. That same thing could happen to me. So in my perception, I thought, why do I have pictures of anyone other than God and gurus on my wall? So in my mind, I thought to take that picture down. I didn't think anything of it. It's not like I'm disowning her from my conscience. It's more that I don't want that thought to be at the forefront whenever I walk past that part of the house, etc. Or if I'm that keeps reminding me of that relationship that I've lost. But interestingly, this weekend, my aunt and my sisters were coming over, and they hadn't come over for a while since I'd taken the pictures down. And I put all the pictures back up, like my dad's picture, my mum's, my mum's picture, my sister's graduation picture, and my mom's like, "What are you doing? You're contradicting yourself." And I was like, "I may be there at this place, but my sister will definitely not understand, and my aunt will like break down if she doesn't see a picture." And she's like, "Okay, fine, whatever you reckon." She thought it was a bit weird taking it down and then put it back up. And I said, "No, when they come in the future, now then because enough time will then have passed, and I'll explain the philosophy to them." And then my aunt, as soon as she'd come in, she was emotional because it's the first time she'd come after the passing, but she'd bought a flower from her house, and she's like, "Where's the picture?" As soon as she got into the house, "Where's the picture?" I said, "Oh, it's over there." Then she took it and she's like, "Go get a candle." And then I got a candle and she put the flower there. And I was like, "Oh my God, can you imagine the chaos that would have ensued if I did not have the picture?"
Yeah. Okay, I can only relate as, being born and raised in Ireland, that all hell would have been raised in that moment. Yeah, Mike, do you want to jump in?
I do emphasize with that a lot. Like when my mother passed away, it's a lot longer ago. So, but I felt this feeling that I need to change things. Like I cannot have all her pictures around that I had before the way it was. But I also don't want to have a place where there's no memory of her at all, right? And so I put a picture of her where she's like 25 years old or something, and I put that I think it stands somewhere in my bedroom, and it's just how I remember, or how I want to remember her, as like the great person she was, and not focusing on the last years that were more painful. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, guys. I'm sure the audience, they'll have similar stories. We'll all lose loved ones. That's the one thing that's guaranteed, I think, in this life. So it's good to be able to come to some form of understanding of what's occurring and how to deal with it. And these kind of things are very important. And Guruji, he wasn't beyond feeling these human emotions, and he certainly described these emotions for us then to be able to, as you mentioned, Mike, maybe relate to him more and Sri Yukteswar more. And by the way, just to go back, I meant to say on Sri Yukteswar, trembling like a frightened child, as described in the Autobiography of a Yogi, it's like a frightened child. I don't think he was actually frightened like a child. I think this is more the physical, what was actually happening physically, from a material point of view rather than psychological. Mike.
It's a bit similar to when Sri Yukteswar just kind of totally dropped the bomb on Lahiri Mahashai when he kind of told him, I met Babaji and he told me to tell you your time's coming to an end or something like that. There's that story in the Autobiography of a Yogi. And then he said suddenly Lahiri Mahashai became very earnest and everything and started meditating. And I feel like it is a big deal, right, to leave the body. It's not nothing, even if you're an avatar.
And we're going to get into more of those details in future minutes, where we see a change in Yogananda as a consequence of what happens here today. So this is a real shift. And there's a question maybe here in the cards. How did we feel when we were watching this minute? And I can kind of jump in here and say, I personally realized after watching it a few times, I was holding my breath with certain moments, and I didn't realize, like, oh geez, right, I need to remind myself to breathing in, because I think I was so captivated by the scenes. Again, they caught this on video. It was fascinating. It was emotionally kind of challenging for me in some ways as well, because I think I've maybe with Yoga, there's a great picture of Yogananda there where he's in slow-mo and he's walking away from a scene. I think it may be, at the funeral, may not be. And he's walking away and he looks up at the camera. And I just felt like I was going through those, these emotions that he was going through. So very, very heavy. I don't know about you guys, what you were feeling when you were watching these minutes. Priyank?
Yeah, it was very heavy, and the reason I wanted to ask this question is because I was speaking to my brother-in-law and about Mahasamadhi, and I said, "Oh yeah, you would have seen how Sri Yukteswar in the film, he left his body in a lotus position, and his body was in that kind of rigor mortis position when in the film." And he's like, "No, I don't remember that," and I was like, "Wow, this is like the most probably the most moving." Scenes in many ways, those images, because how often do you actually see a dead body on cinema? Probably wouldn't, even if it wasn't a documentary type thing, it probably wouldn't even be allowed to be shown. So I was like, how is it that you forget? And then I was thinking of other people like you, Chris, that obviously this is going to be etched in your heart, and similarly it is in mine. But I thought it was such a strange reaction for some people to forget about it. And he's not a devotee of Yogananda, but he is a devotee. And other people for it to be very disturbing and very moving, and in your case couldn't breathe.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to kind of compound that, what I'll not forget is the look in Yogananda's eyes in that scene that they captured and they included at the right time.
Yeah, I think that look was, if I'm not mistaken, they lowered his body in a cloth, probably in the grave, and Yogananda was just walking away after they'd lowered his body, and he looked up at the camera. So they'd just literally dropped his body that was draped in a white cloth. Mike?
I feel like some people who watch the movie, they're not even aware what they're looking at. They're not even aware that they're looking at a body where the soul has left already, right? I mean, it is an incredible scene, and having that on video is, it's very hard to not really hard to forget. And I had to think a lot about what I saw there, but there's this one scene where Guruji touches his cheeks, I think. And it's so nice because it's such a, that he left the body, but there's still, he's like caressing it, right? He's like, there's still this love there, even though the soul has left the body, but that was my master's temple, so I treat it with love, right?
I had a maybe different take on that. I thought he was cupping in his chin, and whether he was, I initially thought he was checking for a pulse, but actually rereading the autobiography of a yogi, he had passed some time before that. And I think Yogananda, what he was doing was probably beyond my understanding, but he was maybe working with the body in some way. Priyank, you're nodding your head, maybe you know more about this, but
I think that because although he's in Mahasamadhi, his body would have swayed to one side, as would his neck. So if you look at many of those images, they're actually holding up his body so it stays upright. And similarly, Yogananda is holding up his head so it doesn't tilt to the side, so that we can, the camera can get a good shot of him. And in that case, I think he's actually holding his chin up in one of the pictures, so it's upwards. And this is exactly what I was talking about, because I was thinking, and many people would find this quite disturbing, if not offensive, way to treat a deceased. That's why I wanted to discuss this, because in India it's not really, and it's not at all, because we acknowledge that this body is just a lump of clay, really, and there's no, in Christianity there's, this body will rise up again, after the day of judgment, etc. And that's probably why they revere the body a little bit, but in the East that's obviously not the case at all. And similarly, in the case of my mum as well, similar thing happened, because my I'd meticulously, because we had the benefit of knowing where the illness was going, I meticulously planned what was going to happen on the last few days before she gets cremated. So I knew exactly what to do, and everyone was like, what are you, aren't you like emotional about this? How are you managing to keep it all together? Like, no, we can't do that. That's, that's a body, we need to respect it, etc. So for example, we have to change, you have to wash the body, you have to change into a white attire. My mum had picked like a colorful sari, and the tradition is white, pure white outfit, and that's not for the benefit of the body, but it's for the benefit of the people or the family that are mourning, because the process should be liberating, not just for that person who's passed, but actually everyone that's touched by the passing. So yeah, there was that. But with my family's case, it was interesting because obviously most of them, even though they're Hindus, they've read, the cultures, they've assimilated the traits of like a Western funeral where you don't touch the body, you don't do anything, you just send it to the mortuary, and you let them deal with it as if they know what they're doing any more than what you would. But obviously I'd done a lot of reading in the subject and introspected before, so I knew exactly, I knew how we were going to deal with it, and everyone was quite shocked, but thankfully because I was the only son and I was the main carer, they didn't really raise any objections.
Yeah, it's I'm going through something with something similar with my cousin at the minute, and it's always challenging between different backgrounds of knowledge and thinking philosophies of what to do, but I'm glad to hear, Priyanka, you were able to enact a lot of these things for sure. I'm sure it helped considerably. We haven't really even got to the subject matter of this minute yet, by the way. I'm just like, there's so many like deep topics of conversation here, I wanted to just touch on one more thing before we kind of get into the minute, and it is that whenever Yogananda had this inner sort of divine voice that spoke to him to say, don't go there tonight, he was obedient, and he went the next day. And when he was on the train, I think it was a 200 or 300 kilometer journey from where he was, it says in the Autobiography of a Yogi, as he was sitting in the train, a vision of Sri Yukteswar appeared before him, and he was sitting very grave and countenance with a light on each side. And Yogananda said, "Is it all over?" I lifted my arms beseechingly, and he nodded Sri Yukteswar and slowly vanished. So really incredible. And the other thing there that I left out was a black astral cloud suddenly covered the sky. So this must have been this moment when Sri Yukteswar had his Mahasamadhi, he left the body, and Yogananda is sitting there in the train. Mike, to your point, when he was in the grocery store and he realized that his brother passed, he sees this, black astral cloud and this vision of Sri Yukteswar, who confirmed, time's up. Unbelievable. When I was reading this is part of the magic of the Autobiography of Yogi, that he speaks truth to you, and you say, okay, well, yeah, this is real, this happens, and the reality of life is just so complex and amazing, really. I was just in awe when I read this, but that really sets the scene for when Yogananda then arrives to see Sri Yukteswar in person in purity in his ashram. And I'll just read this part of the Autobiography out, because in Yogananda's words, he says, "Stunned, I swayed, realizing that in diverse ways my Guru was trying to convey to me devastating news. Seething with rebellion, my soul was like a volcano. By the time I reached the Puri hermitage, I was nearing collapse. The inner voice was tenderly repeating, 'Collect yourself, be calm.' I entered the ashram room where my master's body, unimaginably lifelike, was sitting in the lotus posture, a picture of health and loveliness. A short time before his passing, my Guru had been slightly ill with fever, but before the day of his ascension into the infinite, his body had become completely well. No matter how often I looked, at his dear form, I could not realize that its life had departed. And he goes on to say, as Priyank mentioned, the line of Bengal is gone, and he conducted the solemn rites in the garden of the Puri Ashram. Has anybody visited the Puri Ashram? Has anybody been there? No, Mike, no. Yeah, I wonder what it would be like to go. Sure, quite amazing, really. So that was all the prelude, in the autobiography of Yogi. And in the scenes, then, the somber, sorrowful music playing in the documentary, the scenes very, very somber, all black and white footage, amazing video footage that they managed to capture of Guruji and others, with Sri Yukteswar. He's sitting in the lotus posture, as we mentioned. And, on either side of him, we had Guruji on his right-hand side, and then another man who I wasn't sure who he was, maybe an older disciple on his left, who was, holding him in place and upright. Before I go on, Priyank, do you want to jump in with a comment?
Yeah. So I think there's two categories of image. There's one category of image where it's literally they've kept his body as it was when he passed, and then there's a second set of images where they've got garlands of flowers around him, and I think they may have changed his clothes, but basically what happens is you, as I said with my mum, you before the cremation, or in this case the burial, you wash the clothes, and you wash the body, and then you change the clothes to new clothes, not clothes that they would have worn in the past, not old clothes. It's a new attire, and then that goes with the body. So yeah, I think if you look closely, you'll see the difference between the two groups of images, and apparently Yogananda conducted the rites, the proper rituals, and the body was entombed in the lotus position in the ashram gardens according to the Hindu customs. So that's pretty unique. The apparently saints that take Mahasamadhi, or gurus that have left the body consciously, don't need to be cremated. And I think we've discussed this in the past, but they have something called a Mahadi Stan. Stan means like a same root word for stand, and it means it's a temple. It's a temple of a location where where a samadhi would have taken place. So then that space becomes a consecrated space and powerful to visit, and hence going to the Puri Ashram, because they, Sananda apparently built a temple at the site where the Mahasamadhi took place, and that is a temple in its own right. So you should go and see it.
Sure. Mike, do you want to jump in? You're muted, Mike.
I was just gonna ask Priya exactly that, and he basically answered my question. And then my follow-up would be, you don't need to cremate people who go into, or saints that go into Mahasamadhi, because you do the cremation rite because to remove all attraction as for the astral body to come back to the body, right? To cut the cord between the material world and the astral being, right? And for perfect master, this is not necessary, right?
Yeah. There's some temples in India that is literally near my home village, in a place called Nadiad. There's something called a Santaram temple, and there's literally wherever a saint has taken a samadhi, they've built a small shrine for him or her. So there's this space where there's like 8 small shrines in the space of a small compound, and it's where each master of the lineage took their Mahasamadhi. So it's a pretty special place.
Yeah, incredible. So one thing that I might get flack for saying this, but I couldn't help but kind of chuckle at, is the expressions of the on the faces of the children. They're clearly very, very solemn expressions. But I just I just felt so I wouldn't say sorry for them, but my heart broke for them. But they're very, very young children sitting in front of Sri Yukteswar's body. But there's a whole plethora of people in there. Sorry, I think, am I lagged?
No, you're fine. You're fine.
You're fine.
Okay, sorry. I think my video lagged. There's a whole plethora of people there, but the video scans across, and you see these children sitting in front of Sri Yukteswar's body, clearly moved, clearly upset that of what they're witnessing. And really, the scene, and to your point, Mike, I think people may watch this and not really realize what's going on. So has Sri Yukteswar actually left his body? They were carrying in a cloth or a large bit of cloth that they were carrying his body. What was he maybe in Mahasamadhi at that point, or what was going on? They didn't really explain this in the documentary, so I think you could be forgiven if you didn't know what was going on and you hadn't read the Autobiography of a Yogi. So the minute then it does come towards an end after all these amazing scenes, and I think in one of them you see Richard Wright standing there, very slim and slender, and in the end of the minute you see some shots of a boat on a river. You see the Regent Hotel, and we see Master sitting in an elegant looking room overlooking what must be a balcony, with the doors wide open, clearly contemplating what is just taken place. And we have some script, in this minute where Yogananda says, "Master mine, why did you leave me?" And that is really beseeching to what Yogananda must have been feeling and experiencing at the time. And so he was contemplating what was happening, or certainly looking that way in this scene. And we see a touch of a man being Sri Yukteswar in a ghostly kind of translucent form on Yogananda's shoulder, and he appears in a way, he melts into the scene in a reflection. They did that quite a nice way, like clever way, into a mirror where Yogananda is sitting in the room, the mirror is there, and we see this form of Sri Yukteswar appearing and then coming to put his hand on Yogananda's shoulder. So that is, as we talked about at the very top of the call, Sri Yukteswar reappearing as he does in the Autobiography of a Yogi to Yogananda, but they don't really describe what is going on in the documentary. Mike, do you want to jump in?
That is kind of what I was going to say, what you just mentioned. They basically show Bombay, they show him in the hotel room, but they don't really go into what's happening there. So they're hinting at it, but maybe that's even teasing it or consciously saying, we're not getting into this, but we acknowledge that this happened, kind of, right? What do you guys think?
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, my take on this was there's just so much content that they need to focus. They need to focus it somehow, and this is quite a solemn subject as well. And I think it would stretch and challenge people's imagination if they're not into the teachings of yoga, the philosophies, the understandings. They maybe just simply wanted to sidestep this and try to, insinuate or hint that yes, these things may have occurred. But I think it's just a necessary. I wouldn't be surprised if they had it in one cut and they just decided to leave it out. Put it that way, because it wouldn't be that difficult. There wasn't that much script in these minutes, in this minute, the previous one, or the next. So it wouldn't have been that difficult to do a voiceover to actually describe in some way what was going on. But yeah, they probably just wanted to leave it out for simplicity's sake, from what I think. Mike, do you want to jump in?
Maybe simplicity's sake, or maybe it was because it's already so controversial depicting Sri Yukteswar with another actor, right? We talked about this when the two met, right? And we even now, I mean, to show him in this mirror, imagine they would have made a huge scene with someone acting as Sri Yukteswar reappearing and then talking about the astral plane. I feel like maybe that's something they felt like that was really difficult to actually do in a movie, so they just didn't go for
that. And Mike, I'm sure you're particularly aggrieved because this, if I'm allowed to say, is one of your favorite chapters in the autobiography of a yogi. This next the next part of Sri Yukteswar's resurrection. It's so magical, isn't it? Just reading that just blew my mind about 100 times. That chapter.
Yes, if anyone ever has the question, what is the astral plane like? Just read that chapter. There's so much detail, so much. It's just because the book is about Guruji's life, and suddenly they go into this. They start this whole new discourse about this magical world, right? And when I first read that, I was just blown away, and I still like rereading it sometimes because it is actually something. Every time I read it, there's something new that I hadn't that I missed before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, tends to be the way, doesn't it, with the autobiography of a yogi? Priyank?
Yeah, same for me. This is in my top 3 chapters, the resurrection of Sri Yukteswar, because the content is just phenomenal, and I love the way that it is how it kind of the narrative in that section, because it's like, you know, the Bhagavad Gita is like this despondent Arjuna, and he's given up hope, and he drops his weapon and he starts asking question after question after question. And similarly, in this case, Yogananda is the Arjuna, and obviously we amongst self-realization fellowship disciples, we believe Yogananda was Arjuna in a previous incarnation. So this kind of feels nuanced, but in a similar tone, this whole dialogue that Yogananda has with Sri Yukteswar. And I've got the best bits. I've picked out the best bits. So I think, like, if they had done like, for example, dedicated 1 or 2 minutes to this scene, I've got like some things that I think I personally would have liked them to have added. So if you open the resurrection of Sri Yukteswar card, I don't know if Chris, if now is the appropriate time, maybe we can read out my favorite sections. Mike's first.
So long as the soul of man is encased in 1, 2, or 3 body containers, sealed tightly with the corks of ignorance and desires, he cannot merge with the sea of spirit. When the gross physical receptacle is destroyed by the hammer of death, the other 2 coverings, astral, causal, still remain to prevent the soul from consciously joining the omnipresent life. When desirelessness is attained through wisdom, its power disintegrates the 2 remaining vessels. The tiny human soul emerges, free at last. It is one with a measureless amplitude.
Yeah,
beautiful.
I think there's a couple of sections in the autobiography. You do a word search in the autobiography, the word free, it comes out with some epic sequences in the autobiography of a yogi, and this one I think is the top of my list of how he's used the word free, because free at last, when I read that, it made me shake. Such a deep concept of imprisoned selves. Mike?
Yeah, the last 2 sentences, they remind me a bit of the Samadhi poem. And when he says free, when he describes the tiny soul and free at last. And I feel like the word free is like probably changing its meaning a bit through the ages, right? I feel like in the Kali Yuga, free meant you are not imprisoned by somebody else who put you in a prison. And I feel like in the spiritual context, especially, free means free from your own desires, free to do what's right, right? And that is like a more higher ages meaning of free.
Yeah, agreed.
Shall I continue reading?
Yes, please.
Never from song or story had I ever received such inspiring knowledge. Though the Hindu scriptures refer to the causal and astral worlds and to man's three bodies, how remote and meaningless those pages compared with the warm authenticity of my resurrected master. From him indeed existed not a single undiscovered country, from whose bourne no traveler returns.
Yeah. I thought I did the comparison of the Bhagavad Gita and this chapter, and obviously you can't really compare because the Bhagavad Gita is like this complete scripture that's almost perfect, probably in poetry, prose, everything about it is probably the most perfect scripture that there is. But for us as devotees, like obviously this chapter has virtually everything that that Bhagavad Gita has, or the most important elements of it anyway. So I was thinking, what's better for us to read, the Bhagavad Gita and study it in detail, or this chapter, because of how much beauty and depth and the way that it's described. It's interesting because there's other biographers of Yogananda that kind of brush this chapter aside because there's no witnesses, there's no record of it ever having taken place. So as a biographer, I'm not really interested in this because anyone could come up with anything if no one was there to prove it. But such perfection in the description and how it marries so well with not other Hindu scripture from time immemorial, but also to the rest of the autobiography, like how Mike just said, like the Samadhi poem, it's in there as well, all of this stuff, and his descriptions of the astral causal is all in there, and the material and the yugas are in there. So it's like it's all this lovely consistent beauty, and it's just mind-blowing, even compared to scripture such as the Gita. Chris?
I think in some level there's is it maybe in the Gita as well, Yogananda talks about this, about the intellect and knowledge and information can come through different channels, intellect or intuition. And he says basically, if you don't have the intellect, trust your intuition, and that I'd probably rely on that very very much. I'll admit, and my intuition tells me this is true. When I first read it, so it was like truth to my soul, not to my mind. So at some level, I felt that this is true. And I think if you were to admit that to certain people, they would think you're mad. And hey, like rightly so, they're free to think what they want. But whenever you read this, for me, having maybe gone years without this kind of information and knowledge and wisdom, it was like, quenching a thirst. So yeah, I totally agree with your depiction there, Priyank. But to answer your question previously that you said, would you read this or Gita? I'll give you what I think is the answer, and it depends. Very much depends on the step of which you're in your spiritual path, the part of the journey that you're on. What will land on your lap at that time may be the exact thing you need for the next step to progress on that journey. And if you need some imagination spurring some inspiration, you maybe would find that more in this text than the Gita, or vice versa. So maybe it depends on what is right for you at that point in time.
Such a politician. Yeah, Mike?
Yeah, I wanted to answer the same question, and in a similar way, I feel like because there's different ways to God, right? And there's some people, when they seek God, they have to know everything in detail. And if the Bhagavad Gita wasn't there, they would probably lose interest because they wanted to drill down on things and they couldn't. And there's other people who don't go there at all. They read this and that's completely satisfactory to them. And they have other ways to connect with God. They have more like the devotional way or something. So I feel like this is definitely the kind of higher level version. And in the Gita, you can, if you want to read about the little details and how it all works together, it's also there.
Yeah, agreed. It's like the Gita is like basically as an academic would put, it's the most compiled, the most perfect scripture. That's how it is. And then this is just like heart to heart, isn't it? Are you operating in the mode of intellect or in the mode of your soul or heart? No, take your pick, isn't it? Especially if you're debating religions and spirituality, then the Gita obviously stands you in a much better position than this chapter would. But if you're looking for going deep in meditation, yeah, I'll leave you to take your pick. But yeah, I'll just read the last bit, if I may. Sri Yukteswar gave me light on certain matters which I cannot reveal here. During the 2 hours he spent with me in the Bombay room, he answered my every question. A number of word prophecies uttered by him that June day in 1936 have already come to pass. A couple of things here. One, his Mahasamadhi was like on the 9th of March, and this was in like June sometime. So like at least 2 or 3 months have passed since his passing and this resurrection. And his resurrection is not that he rose from his tomb and dug his way out. It's actually, as we know from Yogananda, it's new atoms or new molecules that come together. He describes this in the Autobiography of Yogi. So there's that. But also it's interesting that it took 2 or 3 months for him to have this experience. And I was wondering what your Guruji would have gone through in those 2 or 3 months. And I think it's also related to what Sri Yukteswar revealed in these two sections, like this cryptic. But this is probably the most cryptic part of the autobiography, isn't it? Certain matters which I cannot reveal here, and then a number of word prophecies have already come to pass. So which prophecies and which matters, I think we should spend maybe a couple of minutes on. So certain things that he cannot reveal. He gave me light on certain matters that I cannot reveal. And I was just thinking like how much like not controversy, but how much like change Guruji's organizations have gone through. For example, even the Puri ashram, where Sananda had that temple built, is now owned by a different lineage, the Hariharananda or mission, which is a different mission, and SRF have got legal cases trying to get the ownership of that ashram. And also now we have what's it called? And in their lineage, Yogananda isn't the last guru. They've got a living guru that carries on, so which is completely different to how Self-Realization Fellowship do it, and then how Ananda do it as well. Ananda is more on a Self-Realization Fellowship in agreement in terms of who the last guru is, but that's a splinter organization, and they reveal the teachings and the Kriya in their own way. And obviously there's a lot of legal stuff that's happened in the background. So I was wondering if that's the kind of thing that Sri Yukteswar told him about. Also things like how not to worry, the work will grow, just keep on keeping on, things like that. So these are the kind of things in my mind that, you can't really put to paper because there's so much legal and, ramifications in terms of like how people come to the path. And like even in terms of like hatred, in terms of like, how people, different organizations or different people belonging to the different organizations would perceive each other. If you actually put it in writing here, what Sri Yukteswar might have told him, or he knew what would happen, then it would, firstly, it probably would clarify for some people, but then it would also alienate a whole other group of people. So there's that element. And also the prophecies to come, I reckon that's an interesting one. I'll let you guys mull over that one. Mike?
He words it very interestingly, right? He says there are certain things that I not allowed to reveal here, right? So he might have revealed it to other people, just not in this book, right? So there might be people in SRF who he told those things to. And then the other thing is, why does he mention it but not mention what it is, right? He's just teasing it, right? If it's secret, then he could have just not mentioned it at all, but that's not what he does, right? He says, he told me some things, but I can't tell you what they are. Then he talks about world prophecies. So what I can think of is that one day there will be a statement from SRF and like Guruji, Sri Yukteswar told Guruji in 1936, and this about that thing that just happened there, or something. Possibly. I that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, there's going to be some ancient note or letter that Guruji wrote down, and they're going to pull out. I don't know. It's interesting. Prank, we're talking about controversies. Why would it be controversial? Well, simply because Guruji maybe did say in lessons and various talks to kind of hold your tongue and not spread controversies. Don't say things that might rile something in the other. And the story that sprang to mind was the story about, is it the devil goes for a walk in the countryside and unhinges the gate, and in a field, and a donkey wanders in and eats the vegetables in the neighbor's vegetable patch, and they come out, and the farmer comes out and shoots the donkey, and then the donkey's owners come out and shoots the farmer to shot the donkey, and then you end up with this bloodbath and carnage just because of what the gate was unhinged by the devil. And maybe like this, I was thinking, well, why would it necessarily be controversial? Could it have been something grandiosely beautiful? But yeah, I think you're probably right. Maybe it would be more controversial, and maybe this is a reason why Guruji did say what he said, not to tease us, but to actually say, look, there's some things in life that are better kept to yourself. Maybe this is something that we can take from that insinuation, if we can link all these things together in speculation. But I don't know, what was it, 1936? So Guruji was at times bewildered by what was going on in the world, World War I coming into World War II. Maybe there was events that he was saying simply would occur, but not to worry, things would be okay. The world wouldn't self-destruct. Maybe there was something around that was timely around then, that he wanted to put in there. But then when did the autobiography come out? When was it published?
Late
10 years later.
Yeah. 1940s. Mid 1940s.
Quite after that point, yeah. So I don't know is the short answer, obviously.
What, you don't know?
Yeah. Guruji hasn't told me. I wish I was one of the SRF people that might know, but of course not. Mike.
Yeah, another thing that Priyanka also touched on was that the 3 months had passed since Sri Yukteswar went into Mahasamadhi. And the way the chapter starts is that Guruji says, "Where were you? Why weren't we able to communicate?" And maybe that was kind of the time that it needed for because Guruji said he would not accept that Sri Yukteswar would leave his body, right? Maybe that was the time that was needed to kind of let it settle a bit. And then of course he is back, and he's also back, like Priyanka said before, it's like a completely new body that is exactly like the old one. Guruji says it even had the same scent as the old one and everything. So it is like not really that he can't be there, but it's just his role in this life was over, and now he can commune with him in spirit every day. So their connection persists, and the same way the connection of us devotees can go on with Sri Yukteswar.
Mm-hmm.
Chris?
In the autobiography of Yogi, we do get a glimpse of what actually was going on in Yogananda's life just days after Sri Yukteswar's funeral and Mahasamadhi, and he says, "My days were filled with lectures, classes, interviews, reunions with old friends, and beneath a hollow smile and a life of ceaseless activity, a stream of black, brooding, polluted, the inner river of bliss, which for so many years had meandered under the sands of all my perceptions." And he cried, "Where is that divine sage gone?" And yeah, Yogananda was really hurting in those times, and he was really sharing all these stories with us, that similar to when his mother passed, he had this black brooding pollution in his inner rivers of bliss, that really shifted something in him. And again, we're going to talk more about this in the next couple of minutes, or the minutes to come. And Yogananda talks about this in the lessons, simply to take the emotions that we have in the human body, in the human form, and use them and mix them with the spiritual, spiritualize them, I think he says. And maybe this is a lesson that we're to take from Guruji's sharing of this information. That's what I take anyway. He's experiencing these human emotions just as we are. So what does he do with them? That's the key for me, isn't it? But yeah, I mean, it's amazing speculation. It's a good question. Thanks for bringing it up. I don't know why. Maybe he waited. I don't know what it was said. But when I first read it, I can say my reaction was, damn it, like wanting to flick through the pages to see if he actually revealed it later on. But no, so we are more or less coming to the end then of this minute.
We still just wanted to raise one more point. The last words were that basically, whenever you enter the door of Nirvikalpa Samadhi and call on me, I shall come to you in flesh and blood, even as today, which is interesting, because we heard Anandamoy in a previous talk about putting your gaze at the Christ consciousness center, and you bring the masters into your presence. So I get the feeling that this is a confirmation of that truth, because obviously we can't enter Nirvikalpa Samadhi, but we can certainly knock on the door, which is at the Kudrasta Chanta, which is what we do. And then it says that a cloud voice repeated in musical thunder, "Tell all, whosoever knows by Nirvikalpa Samadhi that your earth is a dream of God, can come to the finer dream created planet of Hiranyaloka, and there find me resurrected in a body exactly like my earthly one." Yogananda, tell all. So we need to liberate ourselves to the planet of Hiranyaloka, and then we will get to spend some happy moments with the divine incarnation that is Sri Yukteswar.
Yeah, it definitely captured my imagination, probably the most in the autobiography of a yogi. That unbelievable. Prank.
Yeah, and then he had the story where like he spoke to some other people, and they said they saw him. Like, for example, Yukteswar used to walk around his compound, and he spoke to an elderly lady. He's like, "Oh yeah, I saw Sri Yukteswar today," and Yogananda was like, "What a weight has been lifted from my heart. He's certainly risen." So he's he to a few disciples he revealed himself as a resurrected, in his resurrected form, which was really cool.
Yeah, and maybe to backtrack then, unless you have any other points, any other stories you guys would like to jump in with. There is a moment where Yogananda was with Sri Yukteswar before his passing, and we can maybe read that out to sort of wrap up this minute. Mike, do you want to read the Yogananda Gets His Wish card, the first part?
Yes.
It's in the bottom.
Guruji, I came to you as a high school youth. Now I'm a grown man, even with a gray hair or two. Though you have showered me with silent affection from the first hour to this, do you realize that once only, on the day of meeting, you have ever said, I love you? I looked at him pleadingly. Master lowered his gaze. Yogananda, must I bring out into the cold realms of speech the warm sentiments best guarded by the wordless heart?
Can you?
Yes. Guruji, I know you love me, but my mortal ears ache to hear you say so. Be it as you wish. During my married life, I often yearned for a son to train in the yogic path. But when you came into my life, I was content. In you, I have found my son. 2 clear teardrops stood in Sri Yukteswar's eyes. Yogananda, I love you always. Your answer is my passport to heaven. I felt a weight lifted from my heart, dissolved forever at his words. Often had I wondered at his silence, realizing that he was unemotional and self-contained. Yet sometimes I feared I had been unsuccessful in fully satisfying him. His was a strange nature, never utterly to be known, a nature deep and still, unfathomable to the outer world, whose values he had long transcended.
And that was Sri Yukteswar. And it's such an amazing story where we're interwoven with all of the absolute, mind-blowing, mind-boggling stories, talking about astral worlds and so on and so forth. And these amazing stories. We have this intimate, beautiful, very, dare I say, human interactions between the two great avatars, great saints, where there's tears in the eyes. They're simply expressing the love for one another, and it really, when I was reading this, was really moved. These scenes, and I talked about Yogananda's eyes. It really stays with me. So maybe Yogananda's sharing these stories, these real intimate moments between the two, to maybe inspire us to anchor ourselves, yes, in the human experience, but to really have our spiritual efforts above all else as well, so that we can maybe join them in the astral planes thereafter. But not to say that they're beyond the human experience either. So amazing. Mike, would you want to share something?
I just want to say it's so poetic the way they talk to each other. And I feel like poetry is just using words in a loving way. You feel the love, so you feel like I have to take this love and put it down into words, but not into any words, to words that are beautiful and meaningful. I mean, just listen to like Yogananda, must I bring out into the cold realms of speech the warm sentiments best guarded by the wordless heart? And he just knocks it out. He just goes like, okay. it's just amazing. And I feel like the poetry kind of, especially in book form, is something that kind of carries love, like you could otherwise only do by recording speech, right?
Yeah, really, really special moments shared, and they did a good job in the documentary, but we have highlighted that they left considerable text out, and given how long have we been chatting today, no,
well, 90 minutes or something.
Yeah. It's there's clearly so much material there to cover, and how do you do that in a short amount of time and keep it concise and focused. But they did use some artistic license and did include some hints toward what had actually occurred, or what was in the autobiography of Yogi with Sri Yukteswar appearing to Yogananda in the last scenes. So yeah, really, really beautiful, obviously solemn subject, but awe-inspiring topics, and really, really nice to share some of that with you guys today. And really, with that, we'll wrap up this minute. We've got more to look forward to in the next minutes. What this impacts, what impacts this has on Yogananda. We'll go into detail in the coming minutes. But with all said and done, guys, anything to add for this minute?
Certainly.
Yeah, we had. Okay, you go.
Yeah, Mike, we'll discuss that in the next minute, I think. Okay. I like the, that quote. I can't remember where it's from, but death has no victory over Sri Yukteswar. I think that's certainly apt. I think it's in the autobiography of Yogi, but I could be wrong. Yeah, I think that is. And great homage to Sri Yukteswar. Hopefully we did it some justice if we left anything out. Obviously our listeners will want to raise one or two things with us. Please do. We actually, I think the question that we have, is that what we're going to leave till the next? Yeah, we'll do that next week. Yeah. Okay, awesome. Jai Guru, everyone, thank you for joining us.